if I asked you right, so who would you say Madhav Nayur is? Because that's a question that changes every time. But as of now, who would you say you are?
He's a humble archivist. He's an Arsenal fan. He's a Carnatic music enthusiast. He's a Gandhi fanboy. And I think that kind of sums it.
You mentioned when we were talking, we just having a conversation, that seeing Gandhi and reading about Gandhi and the fact that someone can be socially awkward at this, in the youthful years or even their adulthood for Gandhi, and get over that or overcome it or become better at dealing with people or talking to people was really inspiring for you, and that was the first point of connection that you had with Gandhi. So when I was reading Gandhi's autobiography, which you recommended, there was this episode where I was talking to you about just now, where he was at a non-vegetarian restaurant having a vegetarian dinner with his vegetarian friends, and it was Gandhi's kind of farewell. He was moving back to India, I think, and he had prepared a mini speech that he wanted to give. It was very concise, and when he got up, he just couldn't get a word out, and so he just abruptly said, "Thank you for accepting my invitation," and then he just sat down because he was so nervous. And then he had this moment in court as well. I think it was his first case where he went in the court. It was his turn to speak. He just couldn't utter a word. So he just sat down. He just went out of the court. And his client lost the case. That was his first court case as a lawyer. And when you continue to read the book and you see how far he came, he started to give public speeches and all. And that obviously contributed to him earning the title Mahatma, although he never really liked the term Mahatma or Babu. But other than that, what makes you connect with Gandhi? Because usually the youth of today, at least our generation, does not really connect with Gandhi that much. His values seem too foreign, or they seem like, I'm not certitude. What's the word? They seem like platitudes, right? So people find it very difficult to connect with him, especially the youth. So just on that, what are your views on general on Gandhi, his values, and the relevance his views have in today's, in our lives, in our generation's life?
So I think there's one of two approaches that you can take to this question.
Uh-huh.
One is, as a very prominent Gandhian scholar states, it's not the burden of dead people to be relevant. So it's we who make up these questions of relevance and legacy and how they matter or why they matter. Perhaps they don't, you know. Perhaps, as you say, no one bothers about them. But at a second level, if you were to think about the kind of things that Gandhi stood for in his life, probity in public life. Probity is a certain degree of transparency and accountability and scrutiny.
Give me an example, yeah.
The fact that people could criticize him for whatever decisions that he took.
Okay, freely. Yeah.
There was certain openness about the kind of life that he led.
Mm-hmm.
Even his so-called experiments towards the end of his life were out there in the open, people to judge, scrutinize all of that. So things like honesty, probity in public, and non-violence. We can come to the question of non-violence later, why it matters, perhaps, and also a relationship with the environment which was not based on exploitation. An ethic of environmental sustainability. So when you think of all of those things, they have a contemporary resonance, and then you start thinking, whether Gandhi can be a reference point as far as these questions are concerned.
What do you mean?
Because he thought about these questions quite deeply during his lifetime. He practiced, put all of these principles into practice during his lifetime.
Yeah.
And therefore his life and work and thought have something to say as far as our contemporary predicament is concerned, right? As far as our current state is concerned. Take the question of climate change, for example, and living in a more ecologically sensitive way.
Yeah.
Perhaps learning from Gandhian principles, a very, very small way in which we can perhaps implement a Gandhian principle would be kind of trying to reduce wastage. you look at the mess figures which are put up every day
Insane.
in terms of how the amount of food which is wasted.
Out here, yeah.
And how many people that amount of food can actually feed. It's a staggering number. So there's that. There's also that Gandhi also, I feel, represents the ability to engage in dialogue with those who do not share our. And we go back to that point about Ashoka communities need to reflect and engage with those who perhaps do not live by or subscribe to liberal norms.
Right.
As one historian, as one scholar put it, Gandhi had a dialogic imagination.
Dialogic, is it from the word dialectic?
From dialogue.
Dialogue. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Trying to be non-adversarial even with the so-called ideological adversary.
Yeah.
In conversation or dialogue. So I think all of those fronts, Gandhi continues to be a very important thinker.
Relevant person, yeah. I think just because something happened in a time that was way different from yours does not make that thing irrelevant. And when I was reading Gandhi's book, I think what really stood out for me was his honesty. It is so hard to be honest with yourself. I don't think people realize that. But to be honest with yourself, you first of all you can't run from your thoughts. You have to confront your thoughts no matter how uncomfortable that might be. And then that's what honesty is, accepting whatever thoughts you have, whatever inhibitions or whatever emotions you have, and then analyzing them and working on them. That's the reflection part. And what stands out in Gandhi is, in his autobiography, for me, is at least he writes things as they are, at least that's how it seems. And he criticizes himself on things that he did wrong. And then he also talks about how he can improve these things. Or maybe he talks about, I haven't found a way to improve it yet. So I think you wrote in one of your articles that Gandhi is a deeply flawed man, but what makes him great that he's aware of those flaws and that he keeps on working towards them. So he was maybe terrible is too harsh. Okay, according to me, he was a pretty bad husband.
Yeah.
And fatherhood, to bhul jao. But so he was a terrible father and a husband, but in terms of serving the public, or he was the best we've gotten yet, I'd say. I'll go as far as to say that. So, in general though, what do you think today's youth can use from Gandhi? Take away from his life, perhaps, maybe a story of his.
I think, in fact, I've also written about this, about what young India can learn from Gandhi. I think 2 or 3 things, I'd say. First, Gandhi always used to say that, all his decisions or would go back to listening to this feeble voice within, the small voice of his conscience. He was a ultimate slave to this voice within. And young people today, when they're confronted by tough decisions, sometimes fall prey to, social media fashion, sometimes peer group pressure, sometimes what their other voices, what their parents say. If they can develop the capacity to come back to their own self,
to trust themselves,
and listen to what their feeble voice says, and I think that's something that's a great power to have. One can call that a power. Right?
Yeah.
Second would be Gandhi's emphasis on abhaya or fearlessness, which was almost like a religious virtue for him. But going back to this young, self-conscious, inward-looking man who found it difficult to even give a public speech, relentlessly working on himself. In Hindi, one could say कि उन्होंने अपने स्व को एक प्रयोगशाला में बदल दिया. He turned himself into a laboratory. He's an experimentalist par excellence. He experiments with diet, with clothing, with with a host of other things. So I think by relentlessly working on ourselves and having this spirit of self-improvement, imbibing this spirit of self-improvement, we too perhaps can become fearless in different ways. So cultivating that fearlessness is something that perhaps young people can learn. Third, I think, would be the dialogic spirit. Having conversations with peers rather than shutting them down or rather than canceling them. Having conversations with peers who think very differently from you.
Yeah.
Patiently listening to them. Remember, Gandhi was someone who gave his critic almost as much or even more space in his papers. The papers that he'd published, Young India, for example.
To criticize himself more than others.
Yeah. Or if others would criticize them, they'd get proper space in his paper, right?
Yeah.
So, developing that capacity as well for dialogue, for debate, for discussion, for dissent, I think that's another important virtue that young people can learn from Gandhi, among a host of others.
Yeah, I think instead of approaching conversations to prove that you're right, approaching them from the sense, oh, this person has a different opinion than me, and I want to hear them out, because if there's a mistake in my if there's a contradiction in my theory, then I want to correct my work. Instead of approaching them, oh, I want to prove them wrong. Hence, I will engage in conversation.
Yeah, the other has something to contribute as well. If we approach dialogue from that perspective, remember, Gandhi never said that I have a monopoly over truth.
Yeah.
He never said that. He said the truth is something that we arrive at through this process of through constant self-improvement, through constantly working on the self, and through a spirit of dialogue and reconciliation with others.
Yeah.
Right?
And he was quite ruthless about finding the truth. So when he was starting to become a devout Hindu during the early stage in his 20s, and when he went to London and South Africa, he engaged with a lot of Christians, people from different faiths, and he would listen to them very carefully. He would read their religious books. He would learn a language just to understand a particular religious book, and just to see if the Gita didn't give him the truth, then the truth might lie in some other text. So he was quite ruthless about that, finding what the truth is. And so these personal differences between him and people, he didn't see them as things that he needs to bring to the day of light and show the world that they're wrong, but rather there's something that they know that I don't, and I want to learn that, because that will help me in my search of truth. You touched upon self-improvement there, and I don't know, just thought of a interesting question. So when a lot of my friends tell me about the things that they're doing to improve their lives, maybe it's going to the gym, or maybe it's learning an instrument, or maybe it's starting to read more, or maybe it's starting a side hustle. I feel like, and then I ask them this question is, so the question I usually ask them is, what's the work that you still have to do to become the person that you want to be? So for you, what does that work entail? For me, that is simply working on my projects that matter to me, and keep on learning mainly STEM-related stuff and talking to people.
I think my view of myself or my ideal self has also changed. In the sense that I earlier visualized an ideal self that I had to work towards. Whereas now, perhaps I'm more content with who I am, and I rather work on gradually acquiring, adding more things to my kitting. Perhaps now, for example, I wish to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. That's the next project that I have. But I do not link that to a particular type of person that I am constructing. I don't know how I can rephrase this for better. So
you're not striving towards a particular version of Madhav?
Yeah.
You're striving towards just a goal that matters to you.
Yeah.
And Madhav, yeah.
Yeah. There's that Cartesian statement, I think therefore I am. And some philosopher said, isn't I am enough? So I think that now my orientation is towards seeking joy in very small things. Very little things. If there is a text that I like, perhaps reciting that text. If there is a verse that I like, perhaps chanting that verse. If there's a book that I enjoy, perhaps reading or rereading that book. If I enjoy writing, perhaps writing a paragraph a day. Not with the aim that I'd be published somewhere, that I'd be the best author, that I'd just make it.
Yeah.
But just taking joy in these small acts, that's become my orientation now. And I don't know if that's the best, but I think that's the best for me. Works the best for me, right?
Right. I think when I think about all the moments in my life where I've been working towards something, as in, let's say I used to be really overweight when I was younger, 14, हाँ, 11, 14, 15, 14, 15. So that was the first major insecurity that I had, my weight and my looks. So when I started exercising and when I started changing my diet and eating habits, my goal was to look a certain way. And I remember being miserable because I'm like, I have to have this kind of body. I have to have a six pack. I need to have that V taper, the puffed up chest and all. And I was miserable. I was following my diet, kind of, but I was still miserable. I remember it was to the point where I was eating one meal a day, which is not. And even that meal barely had 500 calories when I should have been eating 1800 at least. But now when I go to the gym or now when I exercise or now when I follow a healthy diet, I feel much more fulfilled simply because it's more in line with, because I enjoy exercising for the sake of it. I enjoy cooking and eating healthy food. Of course, I still want to get stronger, but this time I'm doing it for me because it's important to me, not because I want to show other people that, this is the Vedant. This is Vedant. I'm simply doing it for myself. So, on that note, he started Charkha classes.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting. For those who don't know what Charkha is, can you explain to them?
So Charkha is the spinning wheel on which you spin yarn from spin cotton yarn. Spin yarn basically.
Yeah. So you can
from a spindle, put the spindle in the spinning wheel, and you.
And then the thing goes round and round like shit. I don't even know how to explain it.
Just
Google Charkha, yaar, please.
But I think I was in first year of college, and I was always a bit of a Gandhi fan, and I thought that I read about this Charkha certificate course that Gandhi Bhavan in Delhi University was offering. So I enrolled myself for Charkha classes, and I think I've written about the Charkha instructor there, Cheeta Bhimrao, who retired as a Hindi lecturer from Kamala Nehru College. And remarkable lady, spent her entire life propagating Gandhian values. She said something which has stayed with me always. She said, चरखे का उद्देश्य हमारी दृष्टि को निर्मल बनाना है. The purpose of the spinning wheel is to enable us to cultivate a more pure vision.
The compassionate, empathetic
which translates into this pure vision, really translates into a more empathetic, compassionate way of looking at things. And, in my own way, I've tried to cultivate that Nirmal Drishti by being more receptive and more open to other people, and learning from them.
Can you give me a specific example of where you actively tried to do this? An example where this quote came in use to you.
I have a friend who has rather rigid views about their own faith, which I might find a little out of place. But nevertheless, I think I tried my level best to understand where they were coming from. What their reasoning was.
Why do they think the way?
Why do they think the way they do? What underlies their conviction? I mean, I didn't agree with what they had to say, but I could develop some understanding at least of where they were coming from. That really enriched my own understanding or my own perception of faiths different from mine. In the sense that, I realize that it's very easy for us to apprehend people of a different faith through metrics or through certain stereotypes that we might cultivate because of our own.
Did you do that with this friend initially?
Initially, I did, but then I realized that because of the environment that they've grown up in, because of the factors that they've shaped them, because of their circumstances, they have those views. And therefore, from a position where I felt that wherein I was almost contemptuous towards those views, I was able to move to a position of certain respect for them. And I think that is what Nirmal Drishti does in some ways, If we are able to cultivate a certain degree of respect for views diametrically opposed to our own, it leaves us enriched in some ways.
What's the hardest view that you have to listen to, perhaps, or just we all, at least I've had these moments where I'm talking to someone and they just have the most silliest view. I'm using silly is a euphemism here. I'm not using the word that I want to, but I listen to them simply because I know that they think differently from me, and that it'll be very irrational for me to dismiss that belief simply because it does not fit my set of beliefs. That's irrational, and I'm not acting rationally there. So I try to understand where they're coming from. For you, what's the most, I don't know, perhaps irritating belief that you had to?
A lot of beliefs which are aired on YouTube by different, some podcasters as well, where they propagate a certain version of history, and try to present themselves or these so-called experts as saviors of dharma or all of that. That's kind of difficult to digest. And my only response to that is people who say that so and so religion needs saving and so civilization needs saving, perhaps need saving themselves. They're the ones who really are the people from whom faith systems and civilization should be saved in the first place. So that's my take on that. But yeah, it's difficult to kind of it's difficult to come up with very considerate responses to outright bigot, propaganda, hate. And unfortunately, the way the social media ecosystem is wired, hate sells much more than
negativity is always
thoughtful
more
responses or thought through and thoughtful responses, and just somebody saying stuff.
Exactly. Social media is built to push out the most clickable content, and it happens to be the case that the most clickable things are the most negative or have the most BS. So I wouldn't say that it's the best place to have a rational discourse. I mean, just look at Twitter. I got my next thing, so I'm gonna just use some other question that I have. You talked about during undergrad years, you were on your way back to college, I think, and you saw this injured cow, and you made sure that you called the cow helpline. First of all, I didn't even know we had a cow helpline. That is insane to me that we have a cow helpline. I mean, हमारे देश में पिज़्ज़ा 30 मिनट में आता है, एम्बुलेंस 2 घंटों में आती है, but we have a cow helpline. And you called the helpline, you made sure that the cow was safe. And
called the cow helpline, got the cow ambulance, got inside the cow ambulance, then took a round of the campus, spotted that cow, and got that cow treated.
God. Dude, I mean, that just throws away all the compassion and empathy I've ever exercised in my entire life. I mean,
reason also being, I think my devotion for the cow, but I think my care for the cow comes from the fact that I heard the story about my great-grandfather who actually went to Ludhiana Central Jail because he was part of that group of people who had surrounded Parliament calling for an anti-cow slaughter law. And then he was, Yeah. And then I think he was roughed up by the police and all of that. And he ended up in jail. And a very ironical story. He died because the cow that he had cared for, nurtured for, hit him with her horns. And after that, he couldn't take the injury and he passed away. But that's story apart. That story apart. I think I don't know. I have perhaps a soft corner for the cow. I just saw an injured cow and I thought I should get it treated, and that's what I did. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So let's rewind.
Yeah.
Okay. Your great-grandfather, Par Dada, saved a cow. Essentially advocated for went against the anti-cow slaughter law.
Yeah.
He got jailed for that, and then he came back to his regular life after that. He cared for a cow.
Yeah.
And the cow that he cared for hit him.
Yeah.
Like smacked this into him.
Yeah.
बहुत हो गया तेरा. ज़्यादा घास नहीं दे रहा.
So yeah, that's
the ironies.
Yeah. Can make for an interesting or satirical or humorous short story maybe, but I don't know.
It'd be pretty ironic if that's how you go. I mean, dark humor is my thing, by the way.
Yeah.
It's gonna get way darker.
Yeah.
But it's funny because on my first or second week of campus, I was talking to someone about how sugar can be a bit homogeneous, and they're like, "अगर तुम यहाँ किसी को बता दो that I don't eat beef, or that I feel like cows are sacred," and they'll immediately be, "Oh, this guy's a very right-wing Hindu. होना ही पड़ेगा उन्हें." And the funny thing is, I felt the same thing. I'm like, if someone tells me that I have a soft spot for cows are very sacred, I'd be like, this guy must be a very Advent Hindu or a right wing person. So it's pretty surprising for me to find out that I have a lot of my biases as well. And so, with that said, are you religious? I'm curious.
I'd say I'm religious.
You've given this a lot of thought.
I'd say I'm religious, but not in the very ritualistic sense of the term. I don't pray daily. There are very few rituals. I don't go to the temple very often. Very few rituals that I subscribe to. I perhaps do the annual Diwali puja at home. But I think I'm religious in the more thinking way of being religious.
What do you mean?
In the sense that even within Hinduism, there is what I'd like to call the thinking man's Hinduism.
The thinking man's Hinduism.
And the thinking man's Hinduism is, basically the Hinduism of people like Gandhi and Vivekanand and these figures, Ramana Maharshi, for example, who say that, certain aspects of tradition which are abhorrent, you're free to reject them. Why subscribe to that? So
that's the part of this thinking man Hindu's philosophy.
Yeah.
So you feel free to reject the parts that are abhorrent.
Yeah, that are abhorrent, that do not are not in consonance with an egalitarian outlook, for example. So I think reject those aspects. And if your predilection is more for kind of towards philosophy, then you need to indulge in ritual all the time. Maybe it's about reading texts like the Gita or the Upanishad.
I have a question. So let's say there's a religion that says, well, it's okay to reject parts of the Gita or the Bible or the Quran which you deem to be, which are abhorrent, as you said, which have no relevance today, which are just completely go out of line with the morals today's society lives in. Then why do you need religion in the first place? If you think about
That's an interesting question. I think
if the book keeps on, if you're free to mend the book the way you want to, amend the book, then why do you need the book in the first place? Let's just write a new one.
I think we need to delve or dwell on the question of the very specific nature of what I'd call Hinduism, for want of a better word. It's a polycentric faith.
Poly means many, centric means center.
It has multiple centers. It is not conceptualized in the way that most Abrahamic faiths are. That they have, it does not have a specific book, it does not have a pope, it does not have a church, it does not have commandment, So you're free to pick and choose. It's like an open source software. You can choose things and design your own Hinduism. That's how I see it.
That's nice. It's Linux.
Yeah.
Hinduism is Linux, okay.
That's how I see it, Some people would disagree very violently with my very liberal characterization of what Hinduism is. But you can look at it that way. It gives you the freedom to look at it that way. It gives freedom to the believer.
Perhaps.
Right? And then why do I end up believing in it if I can amend it to that extent? It's because it has a certain very deep resonance with me, which is inexplicable, perhaps, to which perhaps cannot be explained in the most rational terms. So even though I might reject this project of the Ram Mandir, Ram itself has certain associations in my mind, certain resonances, which really move me.
Like certain emotions, certain ideals.
The vocabulary and the belief system that has nurtured my religious imagination has a certain kind of resonance with me, which is difficult to explain. And that is why I hold on to it. When I think of Rama, I think of Tapasvi Raja Ram. Tapasvi Raja means the ascetic king Ram.
Ascetic.
The ascetic king. He's a king who's also an ascetic. He goes into exile, right?
Yeah.
So I think of Tapasvi Raja Ram. I think of the equanimity that Rama had, despite all that afflicted him.
What is equanimity?
Equanimity is to not be affected by outward circumstances and to maintain a sense of balance.
Sounds like being rational.
Even in the face of adversity.
Okay.
So
being detached?
A certain degree of detachment.
Or would being rational be more accurate?
Rational would be a reductionism.
Okay.
Detached, yes. Certain sense of balance, even in the face of adversity. If someone were to say something to you, you might be affected. But if you say, that does not affect me. I have samabhava, is equanimity again.
Yeah, so that value in Ram.
When I think of Rama, I think of all the Rama bhajans that I've heard growing up, Naam Ramayana, Kapivara Santata Samskrita Ram, or something. Those associations come back to.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, while the text or the scripture is not above life, शास्त्र जीवन से ऊपर नहीं है, जीवन शास्त्र से बड़ा है. But that dharma gives you certain belief systems and gives you certain wisdom, which stays with you.
Right.
And it is for that wisdom that you turn to these texts. That you might reject certain parts of it, but certain parts of it will speak to you. So I think that prajna is the word, Sanskrit word for wisdom. And the ideal in the Gita is that of the sthita prajna. That is one who has equanimity is the one who has access to all the wisdom.
So one who is unaffected or is rational in the moment if where something bad is happening, kuch bhi ho raha hai.
I think the shloka in the Gita is Nirmana moha jitasanga dosha adhyatmi nitya vinivritta kama dvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha sangyair gachyante mudha padamaviyantat dvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha sangyair. Dvandvair vimukta, the one who's free from dualities of joy and sorrow and
good
pain
and bad
and pleasure and all of that. Sukha dukkha sangyair, to one to whom joy and sorrow are one. So I think that kind of wisdom that these scriptures give is very instructive in some ways.
It's interesting to see how I had this attitude or belief that religious people cannot think freely or as freely as non-religious people can, because in my experience I'm not tied to a book, I'm not tied to an ideology. Am I? Actually, I'm tied to science. But I'm able to think more freely because I believe in just rationally using a deduction system to deduce certain truths. I'm not tied to the Gita, Quran or whatever. And religious people can't do that because they have to pick. That used to be my attitude. But it really surprised me when I came here and I talked to people, and I found that religious people are not just more mature, but they're more free thinking than my atheist friends or agnostic friends. But in general, was this attitude of yours that you can pick and choose the good parts and remove the discard of the bad parts? Did you get this later on in your life, or was this cultivated from the start of your childhood?
I think I developed it gradually. It was more ritualistic earlier. And my relationship with God was based on fear in some ways.
Oh, what do you mean?
Fear that I was not good enough. Fear that I was praying to you because, there's something lacking in me. And then that relationship gradually changed to kind of love for God, and then also a kind of inquisitiveness about God.
Right.
To the extent that I became comfortable with this idea of the divine. Without there being a certain dissonance with my other positions, So, for example, I could believe in, the kind of God that I believed in was a compassionate, empathetic entity, which helped me be more compassionate and empathetic in my life. So my humanism was kind of drawn from my faith. And it meant that some of my earlier positions, which was a certain degree of fear toward people of, let's say, different faith system or different background, changed. I became more open to forging friendship across
with people in different faiths,
different backgrounds, different social groups, all of that.
Yeah.
So how your relationship with the divine changes also changes your orientation towards people, perhaps.
Do you believe that Ram and all of these gods actually existed, like walked the earth?
See, that is not the point.
No, just in general, though, I'm curious.
That is not the point at all. For me, it's not even a question.
Oh, what is that?
I say that because if you were to reduce Ram to the king of a small kingdom, then he'd be a mere footnote in history. He has much more appeal as a cultural icon, as the epic hero of Ramayana. He fires the cultural imagination of people across the country. So I don't think that our God should be reduced to history. I think the history myth conflict or dualism is not ours. It's I think, for want of a better word, it's really not a dualism that we should get trapped in. When I think of Ram, I think of all the Tyagaraja kritis. Tyagaraja is this is considered to be part of the Trinity. Was a musical composer of Carnatic music. Is part of the Trinity of Carnatic music. And he was a great Ram Bhakta, and he's supposed to have composed a lot of devotional compositions and kritis on Rama. So those come to mind. See, Rama occupies a special place in my heart. It's in my Antahakarana, as the Gita would say. Antahakarana is a word used for conscience and heart and all of those things, mix of those things. So he is above all else the emperor of my heart's kingdom, and that's enough for me. I don't need to consecrate a number of temples for him. All of that.
Yeah.
As long as I'm able to pray to my Rama in the confines of my home and perhaps chant Ram Nama, that's enough for me. Yeah.
I get that.
Why does he need to be a historical person for me? Even if he did not exist in history, and only the name Rama existed, even that would have been enough.
I think what bothers me about religion is just the fact it's one thing to claim that Ram signifies all of this for me, these ideals, these values, these stories, they really help me get through they're important to me, right? That's one thing to say that. It's a completely different thing to say he was a physical human being that walked the earth, that flew this chariot and all.
Yeah.
Those are two very different things, and surely people understand that as someone who's into science, whose main interest lie in physics. Scientists are ruthlessly trained to test every claim that they make.
It's true.
And without that, you can't say that X is true or Y is true. You have to test it empirically. If you can't test it empirically, if you can't prove it empirically, it does not exist. And so people surely must understand the skepticism people such as scientists have towards religious claims, or claims in general, like this person existed, or what's the evidence? Oh, because we found this piece of rock. Well, how do you know that the piece of rock has any relevance to him? And even if it did, how do you know that the existence of one piece of rock does not prove the existence of another human being? So, my question to you is: do you hold this view that Ram was a physical person, though?
No, I don't hold the view that Ram was a physical person. I don't.
Right.
I think we do not. The debate is futile to kind of prove that Ram existed or Ram was born.
Right.
The very fact that we have this great cultural corpus called the Ramayana.
What does corpus mean?
Corpus is the body.
Okay. Is that a Latin word?
I'm not too sure.
Okay. Sorry, yeah.
We have this great cultural corpus in the form of text and performance and stories called the Ramayana. I think is a fact enough which should be celebrated and appreciated, and also kind of provides for other possibilities. You spoke of skepticism with respect to religion, right? I think there are possibilities of skepticism within religion itself.
What do you mean?
In the sense that the idea of God within Hinduism has been debated for quite long, right? There have been schools of thought within Hinduism which have denied God, the Charvaks and the Lokayats, for example. So I think more work needs to be done on those skeptical traditions, and I think the Hindu tradition was one which welcomed debate and skepticism and dialogue. The sad part is that there's been a closing of the Hindu mind, wherein we just need to thump our chests and say, oh, all of us are Hindus and everything is good at the end of the day. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
We need to think about our faith more deeply, interpret it in light of the needs of the time, and reinterpret some of its ideals to make them consonant with the present age. So I think that also needs to happen. There is a hymn in the Rig Veda called the Nasadiya Sukta, which says, who created this world? Did God create it? Or maybe he didn't. So that radical doubt did exist, or does exist. That tradition does exist, or at least a possibility of that tradition exists. But it's not being tapped into as much as it should be.
Does it bother you when you see just how religion is being weaponized, at least in today's world, or especially in India? I see all these people and they're like, people say that they're Hindu just not to be proud of their faith, but instead to say that we're Hindu and therefore this Muslims, Christians is the wrong kind of faith to be aligned with. So they say that they're Hindu to demarcate themselves between other people, instead of being proud of the fact that they have instead of being proud of the values that they have. So it's used as a tool to separate rather than as a tool to unite. Does that bother you?
Yeah, that bothers me.
Because Ram is close to your heart. So
no, that bothers me the most. That's something that I'm deeply worried about. but I don't know how to combat it or how to deal with
One
it.
person can't do
you know.
it. Not even
No,
Gandhi.
but maybe conversations like these are a starting point, perhaps.
Of course,
you know,
yeah.
that we can do the conversations that we can have on campuses, maybe gradually. You know, but this is something going back to Gandhi. You know, another thing which really speaks, another Gandhian value which speaks to the present day is communal harmony and communal amity. You know,
so communal harmony. Okay, so
harmony between different religious communities or communal harmony. That man sacrificed his life for that ideal, right? And here we are, kind of targeting people of faith different than ours. You know, in the name of bigotry or dharma or because xenophobia, whatever or whatnot. So, you know, we are willing to group together as Hindus and thampa chess, but we won't, let's say, perhaps you know, group together to save a Muslim man on the street if he's being lynched. That's a sad reality. More than him being a Muslim man, he's a fellow citizen, firstly.
Yeah.
You know, but you won't view him as a fellow citizen because, you know, your sense of Hindu-ness sees him only as Muslim.
It's like he's a Muslim first and then human.
Yes.
Nah, it's the other way around. Yeah, he's a human first. And
yeah. So Gandhi really tried to nurture that sense of Hinduism, which was more receptive, accepting, inclusive.
Yeah.
You know, he had these interfaith prayer meetings. And the sad part is that Muslim extremists thought that he was sided with the Hindus, whereas Hindu extremists thought that he sided with the Muslims.
Quite ironic.
Yeah. So, but we do not have political leaders of that caliber who are willing to make communal harmony into an issue and a movement of sort.
It's not their priority.
It's not their priority. It actually needs to be a movement.
See, they're working against it.
There needs to be grassroots mobilization. Perhaps creating, as in the times of the independence movement, there were Congress Seva Dals, for example. Why can't there be more Shanti Dals? Why can't we educate people about the importance of communal harmony, mobilizing for peace? You know, because peace does not sell, violence does. You know, so
this reminds me of that poem. मैं हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान हूँ. Yeah.
Hussain Hedri.
Hussain Hedri. So, for those who haven't watched it, just search मैं हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान हूँ on YouTube पे तेरे को मिल जाएगा तुम्हें. But just as an ending note, so I think young people are quite impressionable, as I am. Why do I keep saying young people? I'm a part of this group. We're quite impressionable and even gullible. I mean, you're young as well, by the way.
Thank you for the validation, Vedant.
So, I think इस age पे एक चीज हम सुनते हैं and then we're like, this has to be correct. We don't use our thinking. We don't use our mind to analyze the thing, break it down and see if it actually makes sense. So we just adopt beliefs, whatever beliefs were given, right? And I think this can be particularly dangerous in the time we're living right now, because as you talked about social media, violence sells, controversies sell. Especially when it comes to religion, it is extremely easy to mobilize a group of people by using religion. To such people, or just to young people in general, I'd really like them to think for themselves. And the hardest part about thinking for themselves you have to learn how to reflect, self-reflect, at least in my experience. I don't know, what would you say to these people in general? For example, my advice would be to not, whatever advice someone gives you or whatever someone says to you, don't take that as an objective truth. Think about it for a while. Practice it. See whether it works or not.
And whether you can apply it in your own context or not. Whether it speaks to you in your own context or not.
What do you mean?
In the sense that a lot of people have this habit of expounding truths and wisdom which might not apply to you, you know.
At least not in this stage of your life.
Not at this stage of your life, you know. And, you know, they might be very didactic. For example, I see this obnoxious Supreme Court lawyer telling young people, you know, oh, you must read more about your scriptures, you must read more about Hinduism, you must become more Hindu, all of that. It's actual nonsense, you know. Not supposed to apply to you. Take to things only if they speak to you, if they appeal to you, if they appeal to your interest, you know, if you have an inclination for it, you know. Don't do anything under coercion of any kind, no matter how persuasive someone might sound. But if their advice does not speak to you, then feel free to reject it or have the
guts to think for yourself.
Have the guts to think for yourself.
Interesting. Madhav? Thank you for this podcast of swearing out so much time for just the third episode. But I'm starting a tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next. So Madhav is the first guest that gets to do this tradition. So you're gonna write a question for the next person who's gonna be on the podcast.
Sure.
By the way, this is not an original idea. I copied it from Diary of the CEO. Thank you, Stephen. But your podcast is pretty good. I'm sorry. Your ideas are just way too good, so I have to use some of them. But here's the notebook, sir. कोई भी question हो सकता है for the next guest. And I don't get to see it.